Welcome to the Agile On The Mind podcast, where we discuss how to build intelligent teams inspired by agility and the world of cognitive science. If you're listening to this podcast, there's a good chance you'll enjoy the Agile On The Mind Substack. To receive a free weekly newsletter with explorations of agility and cognitive science, complete with tools, tips and tricks, go to agileonthemind.substack.com. This week's guest is Dr. Caitlin Walker. Caitlin has over 30 years of facilitating diverse groups to work effectively together. She's an expert in clean language interviewing and the developer of systemic modelling, an approach for creating intelligent, self-organising teams. She's the author of 2 books, From Contempt to Curiosity, Creating the Conditions for Groups to Collaborate, and So You Want to Be DramaFree. Thanks for coming on the podcast, Caitlin.
Thank you for having me.
Caitlin, how did you get into what you do now?
Some mentors of mine, Penny Tompkins and James Lawley, said, I must have been about 26, 27, said, come along and see this guy, David Grove. He does this amazing stuff. So I went to a hotel in London to watch this guy work. He was a psychotherapist. He was amazing. I was like, oh, that's fantastic. I'm really interested in it, but I'm not a psychotherapist. I'm not a coach. I was a youth worker at the time and doing a PhD in artificial intelligence. But then we did this little exercise afterwards where you just took these 4 clean questions. You had these clean questions where you keep your assumptions and ideas out of them. So he said, get into pairs and ask, what would you like to have happen? And you can ask what kind of, where, and is there anything else? So I got together with some middle-aged bloke and I did it with him and then he did it with me. He said, what would you like to have happen? And I said, oh, I'd like to find my path. And he said, what kind of path is it? I said, it would be one that's really compelling. And he said, and where is that path? And I went, oh, it's here. And he said, and is there anything else about that path? And I went, I'm not on it. That was the end of the exercise. And then everyone went away and I went. And then the next day I left my partner of 12 years, my PhD. That was 6 months off completing. And I went, I don't know what this is, but if in 4 questions, someone can leave my system enough room to update so that it uncovers information that it already had available to it, I'm going to find out how they can do this because I can teach this to kids. So that's how I got into it. It was like a personal experience. And then I went, I can do this. I know what to do with this.
And you had your mind in sort of youth worker mode of like, how can this apply to my work with kids?
Yeah, at the time it was I could use this to help kids who were in not necessarily gangs as such, but in factions. I could use it to help them reflect in ways that then could get them to update and go, what do we want to have happen? How can we create a community that we all want to belong to? That's what my aim was at the time.
So you mentioned this phrase, clean questions. So what is a clean question? What is clean language? How does that work?
So they're enabling constraints. So if this is me and I don't know, probably the easiest thing is if I demo it a tiny bit. So if in a minute I'm going to ask you, when you're learning at your best, you're like what? So in a moment I'm going to ask you that.
Okay, I'll get ready.
Whatever you say, the clean question constrains me. I will not be allowed to give my opinion, have a little chat about it. I'll only be allowed to take the data you give me and accept and extend it. And I can either ask you what kind of, I can extend the attributes of whatever you say. What kind of, is there anything else? I could look for location, whereabouts. I could ask for sequence, what happens before, what happens next. And that's it. It's like the minimal cognitive modelling that you could possibly do with another human being without adding in more data.
And it sounds like it solves the problem of, I want to help you. I know that a conversation is probably available there. I want to help you explore ideas that only you can really know about. But I don't know how to do that. I don't know which questions to ask. There's like a million different ways that I could help. So blah, 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 blah. Here's some advice, here's some opinion, here's some stuff. And before you know it, you're frustrated, I'm frustrated, and nothing's happening.
Yeah. So it respects the ecology of your system and of you as a complex creature, you as being your system being the most likely thing that can update. But you can do it in groups. So you can use groups. I'll talk about that in a minute. But that's what I wanted to do was, how do I then get groups doing it simultaneously? But in terms of one-to-one, you're the expert. I will restrict my helpfulness, my persecution, my, do you know what he just needs to do? I'll restrict all of that, and I will trust your system to self-organize. So, yeah.
I want to hear just a little bit more about what you mean by like my system, and aren't I just one creature?
Yeah, because you're not just one creature. You've got an inner team. You've got parts of you that like one thing, parts of you like another. Otherwise, you wouldn't have outcomes. You would just get on with stuff and you'd be very zen. But, you've got things that you're attached to. You've got thoughts that you have that aren't true, but they feel true, but they're not. There's all these different... And if I was going to go into more of the psychotherapy philosophy of it, which I don't need to, they might go, okay, there might be patterns that you've laid down at different stages of your life. There might be patterns that you've inherited from whatever's happened to your family in its past. There's patterns. So you're a complex system, and you might not know the reasons why you do things the way that you do them. And when we started modelling this with the teenagers, there were some very interesting things happen. So they'd do things like, they'd say to me, so, Miss, could you do this with spelling? And I'd say, well, I don't know. Let's find out who here can spell. And we'd say, when you spell address. And they go, yeah, ADDRESS. You go, oh, what's happening? What happens just when I say spell address? They say, well, I see it. And I say, okay. And we found out, that everyone who can't spell doesn't see it. Now, it's like modelling. It's everyone. So then we can find out, if you can't spell, what are you doing differently? So we started to do stuff like this, but the kids started to model me. And they'd say things like, Miss, if you listen to music, what can you hear? And I say, I don't hear anything. They say, oh, you must do, Miss, because you're singing all the time. And I say, oh, yeah. They said, well, if you know the words to songs, you must be able to hear music. And I'm just like, no, it's like I see it. Like, love me do. You know I love you. And then they were like, Miss, that's backwards. And I'm like, oh, yeah. So I never knew. If I read in my head, love is spelt that way. I know that you guys do it probably that way. So suddenly, through a few clean questions, I'm like, that's why I can't tell left from right. That's why when I write, I do B's, P's and D's. I can see in two planes simultaneously. So when I say system, I didn't know that was me. I didn't know that I have two planes in my head. But the questions, the modelling, which just goes, how does this work, makes me go, oh, now my system makes better sense to me. Whereas before I just go, oh yeah, can't tell left and right. It's not that I can't tell left and right. I can see left and right simultaneously all the time. Do you see, that's what I mean by system.
Yeah, that's fascinating, because it's, and I'm aware that we want to start modelling the systemic modelling and modelling the clean language. But just, I guess, one thought on that is it goes into this question of like, how does cognition happen, right? Which is essentially a question at the heart of this podcast and the stuff I'm interested in at the moment, which is even when you ask me to spell the word address, like, how do I do that? Like, where do I look? Where do those letters come from? Like, even if I see it in front of me, like, see it in what? Where did that happen? Where was the A? Was it in my brain? Was it between me and the whatever? And there's all these fascinating questions that sit below our awareness level. Like, I don't know where I looked.
That's mainly, when I started this stuff, that's mainly what I did. We'd go, and it was all child driven. So they started with, when you're losing your temper. I said, what do you want to start with? Oh, miss, I hit people and I don't know why I'm doing it. I said, okay, let's find out for everyone what happens just before you lose your temper. When you're losing your temper, it's like what? And one of them go, I go red. Whereabouts do you go red? I hear, miss. Okay, who's different? I snap. When you snap, what happens just before you snap? Oh, someone looks at me. And so you know that there's a thing. There's a look and there's a snap, but there must be an in-between. So you go, yeah, they snap. He says, oh yeah, it's too quick. So we leave that and we go to another one. And what you're doing is it's this metacognition, tiny little increments. So then we go around the room. When it comes back, the one snaps. He goes, oh, I know what it is, miss. He said, they look at me and it's like I freeze. What kind of freeze is that? And then what they're doing is they're slowly unpacking the system that lies beneath their behaviours. I mean, I know it's in my TEDx, but it was extraordinary. So I had no idea this was going to happen at the time. The clean questions, you just go red, what kind of red? Here. Whereabouts do you go red? Here. What happens just before you go red? Oh, it's maroon. He doesn't speak English as a first language. So he points out it's maroon. And whereabouts is that? I'll show you. He goes, oh, that's here. What happens before it's maroon? Oh, then it's purple. What about before it's purple? Then it's cool. It's blue. It's like the sky. It's like my mum. That's all we do. End of session. Everyone's got a little session like that. They all go away. Come back the next day. He's like, do you know what, miss? That stuff we did yesterday. Get up in the morning. My dad's drunk. Red. My clothes stink because there's no money for me to wash it. Red. There's no food in the fridge. Red. I've got to run to school because I haven't got any money for the bus. Red. He said, I get to school, miss. My red's right here. Is that why I hit people? And then because we're clean, the only thing I can say is, I don't know. He says, well, what I was thinking, miss, was if I'm getting red on my way to school, I could stop at Clapton Duck Pond, breathe in blue, look at the sky and the water, breathe in blue, get myself purple, miss. I think I wouldn't hit people at school then. Will that work? I said, I don't know. But he has a go. Then they all want one. And what we've got is a tiny, extraordinary self-modelling group. Because then they're like, can you do it with maths, miss? I don't know. Let's find out. How do you do maths? Can you do it with spelling? I don't know. Let's find out. And that's before you knew it. I can now do perfect times tables because what we could do is we could model anyone in the group who could do anything extraordinary. We all modelled them. We couldn't do it exactly the way they did it, but we could practice taking on bits, you know. And so before you knew it, they all had metaphors for learning at their best. I also tell the story about when I came in, and you can hear how fast I talk. And even then, I had a Geordie accent, and I talked this fast. And one of the girls was like, Miss, you're talking too fast. I said, you talk as fast as I do. What's the problem? She's like, oh, no, miss. Do you remember? You asked us all when we're learning at our best. And Naomi said she's like a pond, and she likes one stone in the pond, and she likes all the ripples to clear. And then before the next one, and miss, when you talk like this, you're throwing rocks at her. Now, okay. So now, little tiny bit of clean questions, little bit of understanding their own system, they're able to advocate for one another. And these kids hate each other. These are the worst kids in the worst schools in Hackney. They hate each other, but not now. So that's what I mean by system. It's like they made sense to themselves in a way that they couldn't before, because most questions are actually attempts to change them, not attempts to inquire into their system.
I love that because as I work as an agile coach, I work with teams, and there's this idea of stay curious and withhold your judgment or assume good intent or hold people to a good standard or whatever these things are about how we're supposed to be non-judgmental. But then our language is littered with assumptions baked in that are judgmental or that do give an opinion. And it's hard to know, like, how do I be non-judgmental in a conversation? How do I help you in a way that doesn't just tell you what I think you should do?
Yeah.
And it seems like a really crisp answer to that.
And I think one of the things that I'll always be eternally grateful for was the first job I got was with teenagers. I mean, I already did youth work in my spare time to pay, to help pay my way through college. But the kids, they'll kill you. My kids were armed. If you are patronising, they didn't go to school. So the chances of me getting away with going, so how can we all control our behaviour? How can we all control our tempers? They would have just walked out. But whereas what happens just before, then what happens? To find them fascinating and to help them find each other fascinating, it's like it proved the agile attempt. It went, if you behave like this, those kids, we won Community Crime Safety Awards because our kids found themselves back in education, employment or training because they became self-aware, self-organising, and they did stuff better from intrinsic motivation. Well, who doesn't want that? Who doesn't want a team that's self-aware, self-organising, stays curious, gets on with things, moves from problems to outcomes? So it's like there's something about the microcosm of what a clean question does, that it creates the scenarios that lots of people are after.
This reminds me of, I had a conversation with Dave Snowden earlier in the week, and I think this podcast should come out by the time that one has, where he was talking about the Confucianism and the Taoism of ancient China. And you had the sort of very rule-based Confucianism, and you had the more abstract Taoism, which was not like authoritative, it was sort of distributed. And it sounds like this is maybe somewhere embodying the philosophy of Taoism type thing with systems and complexity, but also it's rule based. It is constraining. You can't just go and intuit your way through this. There's or it's a way to not have to intuit your way through this stuff.
It's very, very rule based. For the clean facilitator is hugely constrained. Obviously. Conversely, it's the more constrained I am, the more it liberates me from my own prejudice, my own preference. If I get excited about something in your system, obviously I could go and chase it down, but you're not. Certainly, the training that if you go through training with me, what you're trained to do is just trained to notice when you're overexcited, either against or for something. Settle yourself again and let the system be systemic. You'll notice patterns in the system. You can then follow where the system intrinsically wants attention, rather than where you intuit it, which is actually from your background, your past, your unresolved issues. It's like they get constrained. So we're rule based, such that we can be intuitive about the system in front of us.
Nice. I've been holding you back from practicing and testing, so
all right, so I kind of want to know about address first. So when you spell address, what happens? I'll give you another one, so then you can do it spontaneously. You ready? Science.
The word science. I'm going to write it down. It just comes out of the pen.
Okay. So let's just check now. So I'm going to give you another one. This time you haven't got a pen. So, rhythm.
YTHM.
So, it's the thing with lots of this modelling is it's a tenth of a second. So I am watching your eyes flick around. I'm watching for where does your system go to check the information. So you've got it so that it just comes out of the pen, which is great. But if you can spell, you'll have a checking mechanism. So let me just give you one more just to see. What about something like necessary? So just stop a minute.
Yeah.
What's the third letter?
C.
What are you doing to get it?
I think there's like a scanning window. It's as if like I put the word into like black, like it's as if I have the word in front of me and then I have a paper with a little one letter shaped hole in it and I put the paper over the word or something like that. And
Like a scanning mechanism.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, lovely. So this would be how we work. We just do little bits like this. Everyone, we do yours, but then we do somebody else's. And what you're doing is comparing and contrasting. So you're like, oh, that's not like mine. Mine's more like this. So I go, if it's science, and mine's really big, which is odd. It means that most people who can spell well, they have it. This is about the max. And it's usually visual, and they usually see it lowercase. So people who do uppercase don't spell as well as people who do it lowercase. These are just things we found out. We're not theorizing. We're deconstructing. It's a very different process. But mine would be SCIENCE. But it's big. It really shouldn't be. It'd be much better if it was this big.
Right. So you see them like cast out in a giant sort of projection.
Yeah. And I think I did that because I used to see them forwards and backwards. And it was a little bit confusing, so that then when the kids were trying to then teach me to spell as well as the good spellers in the class, I had to make mine big to override my funny duality in direction. You know, I discovered that I had this, I saw words backwards and forwards, and I think that had impacted my spelling. And so when the kids were teaching me to spell, because we became a self-organising system, I became part of it too. I made them really big, but it's probably a design fault in my spelling.
Can it work the other way around? Like it sounds like clean language is a good way of saying, well, what's happening now? Let's work with that. Is there a way? I guess you'll probably say, I don't know. Let's try it. But where we say, oh, it's a design fault to have to write the word science everywhere. Can I get it a bit smaller? Or then maybe I can try and model it smaller in my mind or something like that.
Yes. So, I mean, it's one of the things I write about with the kids. So one of the kids, he could spell, but he couldn't read. But when we were doing the spelling, what we realized, that because the kids became very good at watching these micro movements to notice what the precognition, or at least what the body's doing. They don't know. Obviously, we weren't scientists in that way. We didn't know what was happening. But they'd say, oh, miss, he's doing like SCIENCE. So he's doing it that way. And so we said, oh, so what's happening when I say, you know, I show you the word house, what's happening? And he said, oh, I've only got a little sliver of light to spell in. So I've got to put the letters this way. And this was probably one of the biggest unclean moments and typical of lots of practitioners. So I leaned into him. So all the kids were all around trying to do this stuff together. I leaned into him and said, well, just open up the space. And he kicked the desk over, flew out the room and was livid. And I didn't see him again for 3 weeks. And now I can really obviously say, if someone says to you, I've only got a little sliver that I see in, how disrespectful of somebody else's system for you to just go, oh, I know what to do with that. So he came back in eventually. And I said, can I see you before the rest of the class come? I said, I know, because it was voluntary. We weren't in a school. We were in just a community room. And I said, when you just have a sliver, is there anything else about that sliver? The clean questions now. He said, oh yeah, they're wriggly. And I said, when they're wriggly, is there anything else about those wriggly, that wriggly space? He said, they're curtains. Okay, what kind of curtains are they? And curtains I hide behind. Is there anything else when I hide behind those curtains? He said, yeah. He said, it reminds me, he said, when I was little, my dad would come home drunk and he'd beat my mum. And she used to hide me behind the curtains so that he wouldn't hurt me. But if it got too bad, I used to have to watch. And if it got too bad, I used to run out to my neighbour's house and get someone. And you just think, this is what I mean again by system. It's the disrespect I'd done of just going, well, just do this. I mean, it's such a traumatic thing. So then, sorry, that's the long way of saying, it's going back to respecting the system. But what you said is, can you do it the other way? So then the kid said to him, okay, when they did come in, he said, okay, he's only got this much space. What do we do? What can we do? And one of the kids said, can you write it really small? He said, I don't know. So he tried making it really small. He said, oh, it doesn't stick, miss. Okay, so what needs to happen? He said, well, I could get a tiny hammer and chisel and I could hammer it into rock. I go, okay, can you hammer it into rock? Yeah, I can do that. Then what happens? That's house. Okay. Can we do it with another word? Can we do it with another word? Now, this might seem ridiculous to a normal teacher. They'll be like, well, that's what? The child's going to take every word in the English language and hammer it. But somehow the system begins to update. And so suddenly you had a child who'd never read. He could recite the Bible, but he couldn't read the Bible. He could only do everything orally. Suddenly he learned to read. And it was extraordinary. And the class celebrated, and these are, as I said, these are boys who hated each other, but they didn't hate each other anymore. They were pioneers, they were, yeah. So now we can read. So yes, but the important thing is that you allow the system, and this is, I think there's words I use that Snowden uses, but I don't know enough of Snowden's work to know whether they're the same or whether we're talking about different things. But the clean questions get the adjacent possible. So once we say, so we need to do this, and we need to do this. And when there's this and this, is there anything else? He says, somebody else in the group, could you do it really small? Oh, don't know, let's try that. No, I can't do that because they move. Okay. But now that I've thought about the small and that they move, I could chisel them. Okay, I think there were some other things before. He could tape them down. No, that didn't work. Then he could chisel them. Yep, that worked. So they're playing with ideas that are just next to this. And then because they've done this one, then they've got this idea. And because they've had that idea, then they can have this idea. But it's using the intrinsic motivation and the wisdom of their systems, not me being clever. I never came up with any good ideas apart from to use clean questions with them. So it's a very different, it's subtle, but it's very, very different attitude to most people who work with teenagers.
And I'm thinking about it from two levels with the kind of work that I do, which is, on the one hand, this is a useful way of thinking about how I could have one-to-ones and coaching conversations with either people that I'm managing or people that are in the team that I'm working with, and seeing what's available there. But then the other mode is, like you said, working with groups as well. And if I'm working with a whole team together, I could treat that whole team, or I guess the question is, how can I treat that whole team using these same tools that I would with an individual person's system? Do they map like that, or how does it work?
So again, you'll probably have systems thinkers listening to this who are a lot more intellectually or theoretically clever than I am. So I really, really didn't know anything apart from these. I had a handful of questions. And the teenagers, particularly when they first arrived, they were all thrown out of school. None of them went to school. So they were often very angry or very shy, very anxious. And I had them in a group at once in a room. It's about up to about 10 of them in a room at once. So if I tried to have a conversation with one member of a team, the others would start to either kick off or get bored or leave or mess around. And so I learned to go, one or two questions, one or two questions, one or two questions. Who's different to that? And I wouldn't choose who speaks. Who's got something different? Who's not like that? Who's got something else? Who's not got a little tiny sliver? Who's got something different? Who doesn't go red? Like this. And it had this rhythm. But what I subsequently found out from David Grove, the developer of Clean Language, when he was learning about clean space, it's exactly the same rhythm. 2 to 3, 2 to 3, 1 to 2, 2 to 3. That this number of questions in a group is just enough to keep them interested in each other and themselves simultaneously, so that you get a group level intelligence rather than a one-to-one level of intelligence. And the other thing that, again, I only work with teenagers a tiny bit of the time now. It's been a long time since that was my major focus. But the other thing that it taught me was they had no resources. So I knew that at the minute they were off my program, they wouldn't be able to afford this sort of training. I made a rule that everything that I did, I would teach them to do at the same time. So if I was asking 2 or 3 questions, I would have the questions available. They had them on cards, then they would start to ask the questions. And then within, by the 4th day, I would set the tone, but they would ask the questions. And that's very similar with groups. So if you're working with a team, it's a team level questions that you might say, I don't know, I might start just by teaching them the tools. So when you're working at your best, which I'm going to ask you in a minute, when you're working at your best, you're like what? And you get one who says, I don't know, I'm like a kid playing in a sandpit. So, a kid playing in a sandpit. What kind of playing? Oh, everything's all over the place. So who's not like that? And what you'll get, if they know each other, is you'll get somebody, they're like, oh no, me. I'm like, when I'm working at my best, it's like everything's lined up. I know where everything is. I've got a clear, it's like I'm doing a puzzle. So when it's lined up, it's like lined up like what? Like when you've got all the pieces to a puzzle out and you've got the picture in front of you. All right, so you've got the picture in front of you, the pieces line out. So I'm starting to clock the entailments of the metaphors, that sandpit person is not organised like the puzzle person. Sandpit person doesn't have a goal. Sandpit person has a process, has play. This person has order, and so you start to notice these things, but it's not your job to notice them. You just do. You go, who's different again? Who's different again? Some people don't have metaphors. Somebody might say, oh, I'm really focused. When you focus, what kind of focused? It's just like everything else is out of there. I'm just focused. So when everything else is out of there, what might you do or say to get everything out of there? Well, I sit on my own. Like, and I put headphones on. Okay. But what you're doing is that the team is knowing themselves, but in a slightly different way. So the person who's very organised knows that sandpit person is chaotic and for them. And the person who's a sandpit person knows that this organisation is difficult for them. So I might start then with, when you've got the picture and the pieces lined up, what does that give you? Well, then what happens? And they'll be like, oh, well, it allows me peace or efficiency. And to the sandpit person, you might say, oh, so when you've got the sandpit and you're playing like that, anything else about that playing? Yeah. I'm really free. My mind's completely free to do anything. When it's free like that, then what happens? Then I feel like peace. Oh, hang on a minute. I've got peace and peace, but very differently achieved. So that's what you're doing. I mean, I don't normally get the privilege of overtly being able to work with a group where I'm teaching them the process all the time at the same time. But if you do, it's like, oh, I've got tools to be curious about people who piss me off. And people who are pissed off with me have got tools that are actually respectful and allow them to understand why I work like this, not to try and correct me.
So I'm thinking about Myers-Briggs type stuff or different personality profiles and things that I've done at work in the past, which I know I'm often the one in those situations or I have been in the past, I don't know if I would be anymore, the one that's, oh, this isn't science, this is like you're giving me some colour or some label, that's not me all the time, or what's this based on, or what do you... And it's a lot of work to try and, for the facilitator has to take the arseholes like me and say, it's just an opportunity for a conversation and like chill, don't worry about it, it's not claiming that you're X, Y, or Z. I like this because it's asking someone about what they're aware of within their own metaphors and within their own conception of it. So I might be wrong, or like I might, when I say what happens when I spell the word address, I would say, well, I read it in front of me. And maybe if you plugged in the brain and and you would see that like it's actually a different process and it's not written in front of me, it's something else. But it is it's something that's mine and within my own awareness of how I work there. And it's not trying to say, oh, now you're a written in front of you person, or now you must be a this kind of box. It's unconstrained in what the answers can be.
Yeah, it's iterative and it's emergent. So also the moment because it teaches the group emergence in that if I ask you a question and you say one answer, and then I ask you another clean question and you go, do you know, it's not a ball. Do you know what it is? It's a diamond. It's like, I know what it is. And it's that more data brings new insight. You train the group to be aware of that. And so then it stops being interesting to them to go, oh, don't give it to him. He's not a completer finisher. It's like, well, that's not true. I do complete and finish loads of things. It's just that under these circumstances I complete and finish, and under these ones it's not where my natural bent is. So it is a little freeing. I've got something that I was just thinking about, mind it's to do with the microcosm and the macro. So in something like Myers-Briggs, or even something like the Enneagram, for people who like things like that, it's
what is an Enneagram?
Oh, any of those sorts of things where you've got labels and you kind of go, are you one of these, this or this? The thing about those is it's an extrinsic structure that you compare and contrast yourself to. And clean questions get autogenic metaphors, self-generated metaphors. And they are stickier, but they are more intelligent. I believe that they are more intelligent than it could ever be, because you've digitalized. Once you've got something like Myers-Briggs, you've digitalized human beings. You can be A, B, C, D, E, F. And you can be A with a bit of B, or you can be C with a bit of... And this might be good for measuring. It might be good for categorizing because you've delimited what there is. But metaphors are more... They're not digitalized. They're still analog. So I might say to you, when I'm learning at my best, I'm in a mosh pit. And, okay, you might make up a bunch of stuff about that, but the next question has to be, what kind of mosh pit? I say, one it's really, really dangerous and really safe. It's dangerous and safe. Is there anything else about the and when it's dangerous and safe? Yeah, there might be bodies will be flying, but all of us are gently alert for each other all the time. So when bodies are flying, we all lift our arms at once. And so I can generate the metaphor that absolutely encapsulates what I'm like when I'm learning at my best. And I think it's self-generated. It's not delimited by somebody else's thoughts or instructions. And so I think there's a meta message of that is you are the creator. You are not passive to somebody else's creation. You are the creator of the meaning of yourself. And I'm deeply philosophical, but it was incredibly important for me, first of all, for the teenagers. But then when I went into IT, when I got my first piece of business work, it's like the programmers are like, yep, this is who we are. We are not that. You can't belittle us with, oh, they're like this. No, that's actually not okay to talk about us like this. What we are is we are like this. It's
What were some of the thises in those examples?
So with the first piece of business work that I got, which was with a knowledge management software development company, this is in 1998. So the director said, we'd like you to work with my programmers. I've got programmers and they're really uncooperative, and they're just not self-generated. They're not self-motivated. You've got to really force them to do everything. And he said, I just want them to be a bit more self-motivated. And so I go in and watch them. I watch them work. And the manager would ask the programmers a question, so what do you think about this? And then they'd be like, and he'd go, do you think it could be this, this or this? And they'd go, you say, what about this? And they'd go, and then after 3 questions, they would disengage from him and he would tell them what to do.
So he would just come in with like really specific questions and like, do you agree with me? You agree with me, right? And they would be like, no, I don't think so. And
if I was being my judgmental self, I would go, oh, you're playing guess what's in my head and you're not actually interested in them. If I was being judgmental, but I can't because the questions constrain me. So I say to him, do you know when you ask him this? So let's just do it again. And so he asked him a question. I said, okay, Chris, what's happening to you right now? He says, well, I'm just waiting. I said, and as you're waiting, what's happening while you're waiting? He said, well, I'm just thinking of, the things it could be. Said, as you think of them, it's a bit like what? He said, it's like the longer there's silence, the more I want to help. I said, you want to help for what purpose? What will happen when you help? He says, so we can get to the answers quicker. I said, all right. I said, and when there's silence, then what's happening to you? He says, it's like it grows in me. It becomes more and more uncomfortable. And the quieter. I said, is there anything else when it gets uncomfortable like that? He said, yeah, I get irritated with them. So like, okay, pause. Programmers, when he asks a question, what's happening? They're like, oh, well, we start to go and start to form ideas. And said, and then what happens? He says, well, and he says something and then all those ideas collapse. And then I'm listening to his ideas, I'm listening to the problem, and I'm trying to form it. And I said, then what happens? And then he says another idea and then it collapses. So it was a complete mismatch of their systems. And so he was vaguely patronising to them, which felt doubly unfair to them because it was him that was disrupting their system.
But from his point of view, his experience was, and I think this is what I really like about this approach, is that it's non-judgmental for Chris as well, right? Because you said, Chris, what's happening for you? He's like, I'm deeply uncomfortable. We're like, well, if I knew you were deeply uncomfortable, I would understand why you keep interrupting with those questions. And now let's deal with that deep discomfort, or let's work out how to bring that into the sort of consciousness.
So exactly the same as with the teenagers, I just go, so when they need time to process and you're deeply uncomfortable, what would you like to have happen? And they come up with ideas, he comes up with ideas. He's like, I could draw them. Okay, and can you draw them? Can you just draw your ideas while you're waiting? It's like, yep. And he's like, they try that, they trial it, they do what we call in systemic modelling developmental tasking. They all try a little experiment, then they come back and reflect, did it work? Not quite. Actually, what they'd really like is for him to give them the instruction and go away. Then come back, give them the instruction in the morning, come back just before lunch, and then say what's happening. So then what they're doing is they're finding a rhythm that's appropriate to each of their systems and allows them to work at their best. That's the purpose. And yeah, and you're absolutely, I really like the fact that you picked that up, is because it's not just non-judgmental, it's naming without shaming everywhere. And that's really important to this work, is the minute you think, oh, I should have been able to know that, or he shouldn't, oh, look at him, what an idiot, he's asking them questions, then he's answering, the minute you've got that, the chances of his system responding to inquiry are virtually nil. So one of the things the reason I brought in DramaFree as a really important learning for this work, and I think anyone who does clean language work has to do some DramaFree work. Because if you ask a clean question from a position of drama, it's really quite evil. Because you're pretending that you're really interested, while actually I think you're a complete idiot. And so we train ourselves that most of the time people ask questions, if they're in drama, the question is actually a way of secretly shaming the other person. Well, why did you do that? Do you not think you could have done this instead? Those aren't questions. They're, let me just shame you just a little bit. And so we think it's really important that you learn to modulate your own system and go, do you know what? Right now, if I want to say, I think you're an idiot, say, I think you're an idiot. Don't go, do you think you could have done that a bit differently? Because I've mixed up the two things. It looks like care, but actually it's smear.
So DramaFree is an approach to managing my own experience before I come in with clean questions? Something like that?
Yeah. It's if you're in drama is a really brilliant signal. We don't mean nobody should have any drama. We mean don't put your drama out and pretend that you haven't got it. It's like, get your drama and go, right, do you know what? I'm really angry. I call you up and say, I'm in massive drama with you. And you go, oh, okay, what's happening? But what I can't do is smile at you while being in drama with you. Those two things aren't about integrity.
So what happens if I am working with a team and I see that something I want to bring up with Caitlin, or I notice something strange, one of those Chris scenarios where you're asking the team lots of questions and they're very quiet, and I'm frustrated about that. How do I handle my own drama to become drama free, or
So there's skills. So we say drama-free skill. 1, do you have a signal for when you're in drama? Do you have it's happening now? That's the first rule, or the first skill. I'm in drama. Bing, time to look at my drama-free tools. Second tool is, which drama position am I in? Do I think I'm not okay? Do I think they're not okay? Am I making up that Chris is an idiot? Am I making up that team's an idiot? Do I think I'm an idiot because I should be resolving this better? Like, where's my drama?
Can drama be like a positive drama? Like, ooh, I'm excited by that. Or is it said, what constitutes a drama state?
No, not in this so being passionate is not drama. I can be passionately angry as well, isn't necessarily drama. Drama is where you've made a judgment call, which is now biasing your attention and or minimize or changing your behavior in a way that's restricted the possibilities, restricted your curiosity.
So how would I know if one of those is coming up?
Just take a minute now. Do not tell me the content. I don't want to know the content. Think of a time somewhere in your life where you're really not getting what you want. But don't tell us it. Just think about it. Just tell me when you've got it. And either because somebody is not doing something or but somebody, some place where you're really in drama.
Sure. Okay.
Okay. So when you're like that, how do you know you're in drama? It's a bit like what?
It's like I scrunch up and am behind a wall. It's like there's a focusing of attention and everything moves very slowly and deliberately.
So I'm scrunched up behind a wall and everything moves very slowly and deliberately. So as everything moves slowly and deliberately, is there anything else about the slowly?
I feel that I have to be very careful with what I say.
And when I'm scrunched up behind the wall, does the wall have a size or a shape?
I'm not sure the wall thing. The wall thing came, and then if I sort of picture myself.
Okay, was that just a? It was a.
That was like a passing,
Yeah,
passing
okay.
drama.
So I've got to be careful what I say, and it's slowly and deliberately. Yeah. So that would just be, and that's plenty as well. So that's plenty of questions, 2 to 3. That's your lot. And the reason for that's quite important is it's this adjacency. So you said that scrunch up behind the wall, but then that was just some, and that's perfectly normal. Is that you get one, you're like, okay, no, that's the adjacent possible. I get that. Then I can think the next thought. It was the next one. One question, slowly and deliberately are the words we've got. What kind of anything else about slowly? We'll extend that. If I then, you say that I've got to be careful. If I then ask about the careful, let's say that was the first thing you said. I'm now 2 away from what you agreed to share. If I ask another clean question about your answer to that, we're now 3 away. That's not appropriate. So 1 or 2, 2, 3 at the very most. And then you have to go back to normal conversation. And that's a really important rule in this, because otherwise unless you have a contract. So if you come to me and said, "Oh, Caitlin, I'm really in drama with somebody. I'd like you to sit for half an hour and really explore it deeply with me," that's different. Then maybe I can ask you a few different questions. But if we're just having a little chat, it's to do with adjacency, no more than 2 away from what they first said.
Because otherwise it feels like you're excavating into somewhere that they may have not. Tell me more, and go on, and next, and come on, cry. And they haven't given you permission to be there.
Absolutely. And I made enough mistakes when I first started this. I was like, oh, I've made a big mess here. And then it was like, okay, I get it now. It's 2 or 3. And then you've got to go back to somebody else, usually in the team, because that's plenty. It's plenty to create the adjacent possible. If you go too much, it's just weird. It's like you're being a pseudo coach, a pseudo therapist in the middle of a group, which is just inappropriate.
Yeah, and I think that's what's interesting, because I was interested when you said, and I'm aware we're only 2 into your list of, I think, 4, but when you, so I'll hold that bookmark there, but when you were talking to Chris in this example, when I imagine like being in a group of people and I haven't quite credentialized myself and I know there's conflicts and I know that things are sensitive, I imagine that Chris, and this might be my projection, but the idea that we say to Chris, so what's happening for you right now, might be quite a threatening question. Or you say to the team who are like feeling the micromanagement or feeling the frustration or the drama of the other person, saying so, well, what's happening for you right now on the inside? They might be like, everything's fine, I'm at work, leave me alone. So I don't know what the right question is. Is it like, how do you deal with that? Or is that a problem? Or
I've got ways of normalizing it very quickly. There are exercises that I might do as a little introduction. I call it the 5 senses. It's, again, I developed with the kids, but it works really well whether you're a boardroom or lawyers in conflict. So it's just, I call it the 5 senses. I'll tell you about the police. The police is always a good one. So I was working with the police. We're training police video interviewing, so clean language in police video interviewing, particularly of children and vulnerable witnesses. It's something we did in the early 2000s. And so one of them you say, so see a flower. So, yeah. What kind of flower is it? Oh, it's purple. And one of the other police people says, oh, it's a hebe bush. And they're like, no. I said, so, and I'm facilitating them. Like, he says, so for you, when he says purple, for you, that's a hebe bush. Let's just find out. So when it's purple, anything else about that? This. And he says, yeah, it's sort of, the flowers are sort of this shape. And the guy goes, no, it's a hebe bush. And he's like, no, it's not. And so I'll come back in and I'll say to the group, I'm not shaming either of them. I'll say to the group, so just notice for so-and-so, it's really a hebe bush. And for so-and-so, it's really not. So let's just find out for this one. Is there anything else when it's not a hebe bush and the flowers go like this and it's purple? He says, oh, they smell nice. And this guy goes, no, it's a hebe bush. Look, and he gets a picture on his phone and he shows him it. He's like, it's not. And it's not, it's a lilac. But in that little exchange, what you're doing is, again, it's this microcosm, is they're like, this is what's happening when we're interviewing kids. They say X, we think Y, we get fixated on the Y, and we stop paying attention to the X. So I've got lots of little exercises that you need to do to prove the rule to the group. And it can't be prove it like I don't come in and sell it to them. I just do it and I make it happen. I make them go, oh, I'm just making stuff up. What you think is not what I think. So I've got a few rules that in systemic modelling, that games that really demonstrate this, a bit like the whip games in Agile. It's like, oh, okay, I can see it's happening. So that then when you do that, they're ready for it. They know there must be something different happening for him than happening for us. So, you prove it.
It sounds like there's a sort of, I don't know, there's a philosophical point you want to prove to the team, which is we are all constructing our own realities. When I say think of a flower, you are thinking of this, and you are thinking of something else, and you don't even know, and you both think that the other one is thinking of the same flower as you are. And this is quite like a basic, well, maybe for me it feels like a basic thing, which is when I say shape, I'm thinking of a circle and you're thinking of a triangle, and then we try and draw them and we're like, why are you drawing the circle wrong? It's got 3 sides and 3 angles. And so once you've proven that to them, then it's much easier to say, well, if we want to know about this and we can see how it's playing out in our interactions together, well, I have a toolkit called Clean Language or types of question that I will ask you that will help us uncover that. Let's go, or something like that. Is that how it works?
Yeah. And you usually need to use their language to help them understand it. So that was a knowledge management group, and they were like, oh, you're doing reverse engineering with us. And you go, yes, I am doing reverse engineering with you. That there's usually something that they know in their work. Yeah, I'm taking your behavior and we're going to reverse engineer it. That's what we do. Or if it was I don't think in Jay's group they did cleaning products. They're like, oh, we know what you're doing. They just used to go, that's not my elephant, because we used to do the exercise. We'd say, see an elephant. What kind of elephant is it? And we'd play that game. And then later on, years later, in their research groups, they'd say something, somebody would disagree, and they'd get all riled up about it. They'd say, hey, that's not my elephant. You're disagreeing with something in your mind. You've got to find out what I'm going to do. And so they use it as a little shortcut to your inference. So this brings me to my third drama-free tool, is you need to be able to separate evidence from inference. So I say flower, you infer Hebe bush. I say no, but my no is now not as strong as your inference. Or, you say, I've only got this much room to think in. I infer you can open it up. I don't ask any questions. And so the ability to separate evidence from inference it's really important. And it's not just at work. I'll give you a more personal example. So I used to have quite a strained relationship with my brother. And then we have been really steadfastly using this work to rebuild a really meaningful relationship together. And our mother had a stroke. I was flying over there to take her to see him. It was a lot of effort for me to do this. I was already looking after her. I was bringing her over to him to see his children. And you know what? I said, please make sure that you're there to meet us. It's really important to me. We got to the airport. I started texting him, nothing. I text him again, nothing. And I'm like, that's so typical of him. I bet you he's out doing this, doing that. All this, poor me. I do all this work and he won't even do this. But I happened to have Marion Way with me. We were also going to go and do some work at Boston Agile meetup. And because she was there, I didn't feel able to just do my moaning, which is what I wanted to do. I felt I had to be clean. She said, are you okay? And I said, oh, I'm upset because my brother's not answering my texts. So I had to say, I'm making up that he's doing something else. And she said, what else might be true? I said, I don't know. She said, so what would you like to have happen, using my tools against me? I said, well, maybe I'll just try calling him. So I tried calling him and he said, hi, there you are. He said, I was wondering when you were going to call. And I was like, but I've been texting you for half an hour. He said, well, I don't have Wi-Fi where I am. He said, you've got to call me. He said, well, you texted me on WhatsApp. I said, yeah. He said, but I don't have Wi-Fi. It's like, oh. He said, I'm just in the car, car park waiting for you. So that's the evidence is he hasn't responded to my text. The inference is all this huge narrative that I've got myself into, that he's this and he's that. But luckily I didn't call him up and say I can't and attack him, which is what I might normally have done, which would have ruined the whole holiday. Because of Marion, I had to, I'm making that up. I'm making that up. It's not true. It's just made up. So it's a hard skill, but to separate evidence from inference.
I think it's the same thing, or it's a similar thing, is the phrasing of the story I'm telling myself, is when I want to share my experience of what it is like to have a certain conversation with you, or I think that what's going on is you're annoyed at me. So I say something like, the story I'm telling myself is that you're annoyed at me. So the evidence is, I don't know, in a way that I don't have to think about the evidence. I can just tell you the story. But this is a more delineated version where you say, here's actually what I've seen, and actually it's X, Y, and Z, and it's concrete, and it should be unarguable, I imagine.
Yeah.
And then the inference, I'm allowed to make an inference, and maybe my inference is correct. But I am making an inference there, and that may or may not reflect the thing that I...
Absolutely. So in Chris and his programming team, the evidence is he asks a question, they look out the window. There's a period of time passes and they haven't spoken. That's the evidence. The inference is they're not going to answer. He thinks they're not going to answer him. So then he speaks. Their evidence is he asked them a question. They were thinking about it. They just hadn't got to their answer yet because they're a very thoughtful group. and then he gave them 3 ideas, then he doesn't care about what they then make up. He doesn't care about what they're thinking. They start to think about his 3 ideas. Then he gives them some more ideas, and now he's irritated with them. So they make up. He doesn't really want to know what we think. He just wants to tell us what he thinks.
He leaves that with a deeper set of inferences, which is, well, evidence, I left that conversation without what I wanted, which was their inference. They are not very proactive. Let's bring in a coach who can train it into.
Yes, let's bring in this woman to fix them. And so I listen very carefully to quiet drama when people are talking. Oh, yeah, the team don't trust each other. Or I'm like, oh, what do you see in here that let you know that the team don't trust each other? So we got a lot of systemic modelling is very, very light, cleanish questions. So there's the clean questions that are ultra clean, and there are cleanish questions which help us with more drama-free stuff like, oh, what do you see in here that lets you know they don't trust each other? All right. And have they always not trust each other? Are there any times when they trust each other? Oh, okay, what do you see in here then? Okay, great. And you're sort of building it up gently.
So we just got to level 3. So number 1, so just going back over the drama-free steps, number 1 was...
What's your signal? How do you know you're in drama?
2 is...
Where do you normally go? Are you a persecutor? Are you a rescuer? Are you a victim?
Okay, so that's what happens when I am in drama. I have a mode or a pattern I go into. Number 3 is...
Separate evidence from inference. And then number 4 is... What would you like to have happened? What would you actually like? What's the relationship that we want? And then number 5 is what can we do? So once you've got what's actually happening, what would I like to have happen? What will I do? A colleague of mine, Svetlana Shapov-Alliance, she's taken this and another phrasing that Klein has made, and she says, drama-free. I can, I want, I will. So it's like, what's available? What's the evidence? What can we do? What do we want to do? What are we going to do? So it becomes the opposite of drama. Can, I want, I will.
Is this work that I do by myself? Is this work that I do with a coach? In what context do these 5 things happen?
Yeah, you can do it on your own if you're that sort of person. I prefer to do it. I mean, I like to play with people. So lots of people do it on their own. Personally, I think it's better if there's at least 3 of you. So if somebody calls me up and says, oh, we'd like to come to the drama-free training, I say, I'd much rather, 3 for the price of 2, if you can just bring 2 colleagues or 2 other members of your family, because you want someone to play with, you want someone to pick up when you're in drama and name it without shaming you, so that you can go, can I just check, are you in drama just now? Is anything going on there? Or I can call you up and say, oh, I'm in a massive drama, and you can go, oh, what's happening? What have you seen and heard? It's like you need people to practice it with. It's a social skill.
Are these people that I would normally have my drama with? As in, it's not useful for me to grab someone else from elsewhere in the organisation and go along to drama. It's useful to practice this stuff with the people that I might bump into?
If I were practicing, I wouldn't. It's a bit like learning to juggle. I won't learn to juggle with my best china. I would practice with somebody who you feel confident to make mistakes with. And then when you're good at it, then I would... And it's very important that you don't use drama to slap other people. So you don't go up to people that you're in drama with and say, hey, I see you're persecuting me, you idiot. Because then you've weaponized it. It's to go, oh, actually, I don't know what's going on. You might go up to them and say, do you know what? I'm not sure what's happening here. Well, what's really important to you right now? This is what I would like to have happen. What would you like to have happen?
If you're working with a team, do you start with drama-free stuff, or do you start with systemic modelling and clean language, and then once you've exposed some of the... I don't know what metaphor I was going to...
Drama-free and systemic modelling are in fact the same set of tools. They became known, again, it's a colleague of mine, Svetlana. It was her that coined the drama-free phrase. She said, clean language and systemic modelling are great for people who are interested in clean language and systemic modelling, who've already got that curiosity. She said, but most people just want other people to shut up and do what they say. So she said another way that you could look at the whole field that I'm doing is to call it drama. We use the drama model in it, She said, if you just called it drama-free, and what we found, this was in Moscow before the war, they're very anti-war group. So before the war, we used to put on these clean language trainings, and they were well received, and I had quite a nice following in Moscow. But when we called them drama-free tools, the big difference was, A, we had more men came, and B, when we could teach it, they learnt it faster. It was almost because it had the problem in it, they learnt it faster. It's the same stuff. It depends on what I'm being called in for. So if it's a group that love personal development, love that, an agile group, I can do clean language. If it's less bought in, I'm more likely to call it drama-free.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point there, which is these things have a kind of, the words we use to describe the tools that we're bringing matter a lot, because if I talk to someone that is not already engaged, doesn't already trust me, doesn't know what I think the problem shape is, and I come in and I say, I'm going to do agile with you, well, they'll come a whole bunch of associations of that, or they'll make up a bunch of associations if it's the first time they've heard of it. And if I say I'm going to do systemic modeling or cognitive science or whatever, they will bring their associations, and that is not a problem. That just is a fact of reality. So choosing how to pitch it and how to craft it and what shape you present it to them in can be the difference between the same thing working or the same thing not working.
Yeah. Well, it's, again, if you bring it back to adjacency, it's if I can bring it adjacent to what you're interested in, I shouldn't have to teach it. If I always say this to my students, I say, if you're teaching it, you're not doing it. I should be using it. You know, I've got a project starting next week, so we're going to go to Jordan and work with a team. So it's a new team. There's been trouble in the with the old team, but that team's not together now. This team's new, and they're really wanting to form a strong, what we might call an anti-fragile, to use Nassim Taleb's work. So an anti-fragile team, a team where we know that they're working in stressful situations. We know it's going to be high need. So we want them to be able to take stress, conflict and upset, and for it to make their network stronger. So what I'll do is I'll interview them first. And when I interview them, I'll use just the tools that we're using. I'll ask them clean questions. I'll separate evidence and inference. I'll hear problems and move them to outcomes. I'll do all of this because it's a one-to-one.
As in, you'll say to them, I'm hearing your evidence and I reckon you're making this evidence, or you'll just...
I know that. So if one of them says, I say, what would you like to happen? And one of them says, I want the team to be fun. What kind of fun? Or I want it to be somewhere where I really enjoy coming to work. So what might you see and hear that would let you know that this was a team where you really enjoyed? Oh, well, there'll be people will smile when we arrive. All right, so they'll smile when you arrive. Anything else? Then they'll welcome us. We'll go and do walks together in our breaks. Okay, so they'll smile, we'll do walks together. So I'm slowly I'm just modelling their experience. But so I'm using all the tools. So all of them will have been used without them knowing. I'll do it because I just use them conversationally. Then we'll come in and we'll do drama-free. This is Tuesday. On Wednesday, we'll do an introduction to drama-free. So I'll say a little bit about when you're not getting what you want. You're a bit like what? Ask them a few questions. The third day, then I'm in Jordan, the first two are online. When I'm actually in Jordan, then we'll do when you're working at your best, an ideal team for you. And then on the fourth session, I'll teach them the tools because they want to be able to use them with the projects that they're running in Jordan. So by the time it comes to be teaching them, I'm reflecting on the tools I've used. I'm not teaching them something that they've never come across. And that's the same in business. You better be using them effectively in the first 10 minutes that you're with that group. Then you introduce, it's like you're using them and introducing them at the same time. So they shouldn't have resistance or either they'll be useful or they won't. If they're not useful, I would just stop and go away.
I think about that with the agile teams I work with, that there's some stuff that has to be like uncovered and measured and isn't so tangible. But most of the time, like, you kind of know if it's working or not, and the team know if it's working or not. And I don't want any team that I'm working with to be like, I'm sure it's really good, but I don't know what's happening here. You kind of want it to be obvious that this approach is like solving a problem that was there. And you're like, cool, if I wasn't here asking these kind of questions, you would still be doing that thing that you will hate, and now we're not doing it anymore and everything seems to be better. Sure, I can measure and manage the flow, or I can, look at the health check or whatever and see what's changed, and that might be necessary as well. But at that very basic level, like, it should be experientially just a different thing.
Yeah, and I think that measuring, it's even more important with the clean language stuff. If you don't measure the fact that it's, and this would be regularly. I'll tell you, like, a school we worked in Hull. So we did a huge transformation in this school, and it was extraordinarily successful. But when we went back in and we said to the kids, so what happened? How does, right now this classroom is a bit like what? And they were like, well, we used to shout out at each other and make fun of each other, but now we help each other. And if somebody doesn't know the answer, we help them find it. We say, well, how did that happen? They're like, no, we don't know. Just, it was like that. Now it's like this. And if it was good enough, they should not know it was you. Do you know, because it should have been so adjacent to where they were. It should just be the adjacent, we're doing something new. It should have been so adjacent to their outcomes and their abilities that they were going this way. No, they're going this way. So measuring it, if we hadn't done the before and after measurements of going, before we went in, 73% of questions were yes, no, that the teachers asked were yes, no, and answered by the teacher or answered by the teacher. And 9 months after we'd left, I think something like 72% of questions were open and answered by the kids. That's a huge shift. It's a huge shift in trusting the kids to think, and it's also had a lot of corresponding shifts in the kids' behaviours. But if you don't measure it, they don't necessarily know the value of what you've done. I do think that's important.
Probably not a good space to get into it here, but it's a constant question in the agile world. How do I measure my impact in a team that is constantly shifting, where the demands on them are constantly shifting, where the relationships are shifting? And maybe what I've done has made things better. Maybe I was just there while it got better by itself. Maybe things got worse because I was there. Maybe it was going to get worse anyway and I stopped it getting less bad. Don't know. And there's only so much that the data...
I had the same thing when this was happening. When I was developing this, I was like, I better be measuring things, because what if I teach people to ride unicorns and then we discover that unicorns don't exist? Or, and with, some of the early things that I write about with the kids, that kid who goes red, he's a real person. He went into school, all the kids had these new skills, and I hadn't prepared the school for these kids to turn back up with all these new skills. He was really hungry, the one his dad's drunk and he never had any food. So one of the other kids, when they'd finished eating, they pushed they said, oh, I haven't eaten this, do you want it? And he said, yeah, I'd love it. He said, I'll just go and get you a clean fork. So he went off to get him a clean fork, and the kid took his tray and moved it in front of him. And the dinner lady came behind him and said, I saw you stealing his food. And he tried to explain, and she called a teacher over and she had hold of him, said, he's stolen this lad's food. And then even though the kids were going, no, the teacher took him out. And she said, he's a liar and he's a thief. And he pushed her, he hit her, and he was expelled. And he never got back into school. He was thrown off my project. I wasn't allowed to work with him because we were only insured to work with the kids who were still attached to schools. And he ended up on the streets, which he maybe would have done anyway. But I know that I absolutely contributed. That before, he just didn't have any friends. Do you know? That was a direct result of having other kids look after him, know what he needed and help him. He got thrown out. And so that was a real lesson to me very early on in my career, where I was like, teaching people skills when they're in a system that doesn't value those skills is a dangerous art. And so I became and I still am, very careful about who I'll work with. So if you said, oh, can you come in and work with my team? I'll go, no, Well, I won't. I'll say, oh, what is it you want them to do? And I'll ask you a bunch of questions, and I'll say, all those things, those skills that you want your team to have, how do you display them? As a management team, how do you do it? And if they go, we don't, I'll say, okay, that's fine. Let me come in and work with you for 3 months. And if by the end of those 3 months you can actively demonstrate to me that you're putting all of these skills to work, then I'll come and work with your team. But if you're not, no, because it's not safe. It's really not safe for people to learn to challenge evidence and inference if they're not in a system that values that level of rigour.
Yeah, I wonder how many more agile transformations would have been successful if the consultancies would have taken that approach and said, like, yeah, I know you'll give us an absolute shed load of cash to come in and transform your 1,000-person organization. We're not going to do that until your leadership team can show us that you are prepared to embrace change, to embrace this. Well, if you can do that, then you get my course or you get my transformation.
And it would have been so easy. It's like, all we need you to do is just do it, and then demonstrate that it has had business impact and personal impact. If you can demonstrate to us those two things, that we'll train you. We could even charge you a loss leader. Come and do this, and if you demonstrate that you've done it, brilliant. We'll come in and do the rest of it. And if you don't, we won't. Think of all the goodwill that you could say.
And it's just that there's a principle there, which is that our thinking and I call it our cognition and our team intelligence doesn't happen isolated from the rest of the organization, the rest of the market, the rest of the everything else. We are fundamentally embedded minds. We live in our cultural environments, and it sounds like woo wank that is just, nice fluff stuff to say, like, yeah, we're all connected, man. But it's fundamentally true to how we think and how we make sense of the world. And if I'm in an environment that won't let these skills flourish without punishing me, then you just won't get the outcome that you want. And that you have to look at that.
Yeah, you've got to look at it. You've got to look at the systems. I remember when my sister changed charities. She works in the humanitarian sector, and she said she'd gone to this new charity, and the boss had come out, and they had a whole day. They had the whole team got together from all over the world, and he'd been reading a book about self-organising teams, and he stood and lectured to them for an hour on self-organising teams and how they needed to. And she said she just was like, this is so incongruent. What you're doing is the opposite of what you say that you want to be doing and you want us to be doing. Not once have you asked us a question, not once have... And I said to her, I said, well, you're the queen of self-organising teams. I said, what stopped you saying anything? She said, I couldn't speak. And you're like, oh, okay. All of our skills, we did some research at Jay's group where we did what I thought was a beautiful piece of work on it. We worked with the leadership team, and then just about 40% of they only had budget for 40% of their managers. But then we left it in place that between them, they would be able to train the rest of them themselves. Then we went in, and just maybe about 6 months after we'd done it, maybe 9 months, we went to test it. Was it working or not? And the shapes, because you can also, with DramaFree and systemic modelling, people who don't do it have different shapes. So when we went in, some teams, one person speaks and everything goes through them. How's this going? How's that going? How's that going? It makes a command and control shape. And others, it was really lackluster. It's like these two go, "Rrr," these three are on their phones, But a systemic modelling shape goes, this person says something, this one asks them a question, this person asks them a question, this one has a new idea because of these two answers. It makes a network, a star like that. So anyway, I went in 9 months later to observe some meetings, and I was like, oh my goodness, it was the most lackluster. These two were speaking. I was mortified. Then I went into another one. 4 of the same people made a perfect shape. They were challenging each other. Somebody had been off. Who's got a really good idea when somebody's off? Who's got something that works? oh, great, they were absolutely utilising each other. And I was like, hang on, those 4 in this team, absolutely crap. Just awful, the worst you could imagine. Mardy, whinging. In this team, absolutely brilliant. And so then I started to look at the data and I was like, oh, because we'd only taught 40% and they hadn't got around to training the others. So if they were in a group where they were massively in the minority, so it's actually if there was 4 of them, 2 of them were really for it, 2 of them were kind of all right, but a little bit indifferent about it, but the rest of the group had no training, they behaved the way they'd always behaved. If they're in the group where 3 of them had really enjoyed it, 3 of them knew it but were kind of indifferent about it, it worked perfectly. The groups are about, they're between 9 and 12 people. So the same person in a different context behaves completely terribly, but put them where there's just enough of them and all these new changes can be held. So it was a real metric for me then to go, okay, if you want this system to shift, the leaders have to be doing it, and a third can hate, a third can love it, a third have to be okay with it, a third can hate it, but so long as you've got kind of 60% going for it, it'll shift. And so that became my metric. I was like, right, I'm just not going to waste my life being embarrassed because I've done some crap work that doesn't hold.
Yeah. There is definitely something there when it comes to anything that has to be practiced in a certain environment you need to keep that environment in mind when you're teaching it. I'm thinking about like feedback, for example, that if I go on a brilliant feedback course and I learn all about radical candor and nonviolent communication, and then I go to my clean language course and I'm the only one that's done it, well, the force of gravity is working against me, or the momentum of this organization is we don't give feedback, we don't do it. Feedback is evil, feedback is scary, feedback is violent and aggressive, we only do it when we have to, or once a year, whatever. And there's only so much that I as an individual change maker can do, whereas if you bring it into a team and you say, we're going to learn this thing together, we're going to use it with real life stuff, and that maybe is different from what you said earlier with I don't juggle with my finest china, but...
Yeah, it's going to be a bit fun. If you drop everything, it's not going to fall apart.
Yeah. And then you're going to implement this as a team together, because that's where it's going to live. It doesn't live just in one enthusiastic person's consciousness. It's something that has to be...
This brings back, your question, is this something you can do on your own or with a coach? You can, but you'll only get very limited experiences of it. Whereas if you do it with 3, brilliant. 6 is ideal. 6 is your ideal number to practice with. We tried 9. 9 you'll break down into groups again, into probably 3 or 4 and 5. So we discovered 6 is the sort of the ideal. Yeah. When I worked with Hull City Council, there was 36 of them. I was like, okay, that's just 6 groups. 6. I just put them on 6 tables. That's how you want to put them down into little tribes.
So for people that are listening to this and saying, brilliant, clean language, systemic modelling, DramaFree, love it, how do I get started? What do I do next? It
depends on what kind of person you are. So if you're like me, what I did was, well, you don't have to give up everything. Go and apprentice yourself to people. But David Grove wasn't around. He was in the States at the time. And so what I did was I wrote the questions on bits of card and I simply practiced. I took a couple of questions a day and I practiced with everyone. I'd get in a taxi and I'd say, oh, can you take me to Marble Arch? And then I'd see their eyes move and I'd go, oh, can you just keep the meter running? But can I just ask you a few questions? What just happened? How are you deciding the route? So I just, everybody. I was obsessed. I got my 10,000 hours in 3 years. So you can just do it like that. There is no need to expend, money. You could just get a little bit of it, practice it, do a bit more. Or, I'll come back to that point in a minute, which is why a clean question in and of itself will give you everything you need. But I'll come back to that. Or you can do something like Clean for Teams. It's an experiential 2 days in real life if you're in person. Otherwise, it's 4 online sessions. It's nice, it's easy. You'll get a real experience of it. You'll be able to use a little bit of it at work. So Clean for Teams is a really good one, or DramaFree.
Is that a course?
It's a course. Yeah, it's a course online. If you go to cleanlearning.co.uk, it's just one of our courses. So Clean for Teams is an entry-level course, and DramaFree Conversations is an entry-level course. It's the same material, but as I said, differently packaged. Mm-hmm. Then, if you want to get good at it, it's systemic modelling. And do you know what? I'm not going to lie, it's hard. Foundation level might take you 12 hours of training, but professional level, most people, it takes 2-3 years. It's probably the equivalent intellectually of a degree. But foundation you can do fairly. If you just want to be able to facilitate a group on any topic, create an intelligent network of attention around a topic, get the group asking one another cleanish questions, it's about 12 hours training.
I like the idea of the cleanish or like schmutzy questions. They're not clean, but they're not dirty. They're like schmutzy. They're smudged. They're like, they could do with a wipe, but they're...
Yes. They're questions like, what's important to you? What will that give you? They're not quite clean because they bring in importance. They bring in giving. They give you slightly more cognitive processing than what kind of, is there anything else, where? But yeah, they're clean enough.
So the list of clean questions, is it like a very fixed, how do I get a question admitted into the clean pantheon?
Yeah, they're very strict. Well, David Grove spent 15 years, what was then his wife, who's now Kai Davies-Lynn. They spent 15 years going, what does this do to your cognition? What does this do to your cognition? What does this one? What if I said, what sort of? What sort of, I'm stuck. What sort of stuck versus what kind of stuck? So he spent a long time paring them down and paring them down and paring them down. And then he, so there's about 10 clean questions. You can ask about attributes, what kind of, is there anything else? Location, whereabouts? Sequence, what happens next, then what happens before, where does something come from? Or you can ask for a metaphor. That's like what? So
as we begin to wrap up, I'm going to ask you for feedback on the episode, hopefully using clean questions. I'll see if I can do those, and then you can you can tell me if I'm doing it right or not. But before we finish up, is there anything else that you wanted to bring or that you wish you would have had a chance to talk about?
There's two things. I'd like to know, when you're working at your best, you're like what?
When I'm working at my best, I am like little mini explosions, little like fireworks.
And little mini explosions. So when they're like fireworks and they're mini, is there anything else about them being mini?
There's lots of them. So they're everywhere, and it feels like they're multiplying, and it feels kind of like you're touching something infinite. And
touching something infinite, exactly. They are everywhere. They're multiplying, and they're little mini explosions. And when there's explosions, anything else about those explosions?
They feel really good. Like each one is like a little...
Where do they feel? Yeah, whereabouts do they feel really good?
They feel really good in my chest. They sort of, I don't know, like in my core, in my chest, in my insides, they're like a little like woof of radiating warm sensation.
So you've got that in your chest, you've got that woof, radiating warm sensation, and you've got these little mini explosions everywhere. They're multiplying. So that's enough. 2 or 3 questions. So what a clean question does, I'm only just realising this as I'm just writing my new book, which is called Inspiring Capability, which is sort of 25 years later, 24 years later, what do I know now? Clean questions do this thing. Is that they keep you safe from me. So you say little mini explosions, fireworks. You are safe from me. I am not going to make that mean something. I'm not going to project. So they keep me safe from me. So they create safety. As I listen, I use your exact words plus a little clean question. I have to listen attentively. I'm watching your micro movements, I'm watching, and I'm paying attention to you. And this builds up this sense of belonging. I say, you matter. In this moment, your thoughts, your ideas, your words, your movements, they matter. So, but even though it's safe and you belong, there's a sense of belonging, you are completely free and your attention is free to go, because I'm constrained, but you're not. So there's freedom. And this, I think that the ability to create this safety, belonging and freedom, it's the antidote to microaggression. It's the opposite of drama. It says, you're safe, you matter, and now we can go anywhere. And if I do that for you, 2 or 3 questions, you do that for me, 2 or 3 questions, the chances now of us developing a good working relationship, if that's what we're about to do, is so much easier, because now we adjacently, so well, if we can do that, we could do it with anything. We can do it when we have an issue. We could do it when we want to create a new product. You know, it's, so yeah, safety, belonging and freedom. That's the thing. That's why I think even if you just asked 2 or 3 clean questions a day and nothing else, you will create in your own system and other people's systems more safety, belonging and freedom. And I don't know how that could be a bad thing. That was the only other thing I wanted to say.
That feels like a wonderful place to begin to wrap up. So, Dr. Caitlin Walker, appearing on this podcast was like what?
It was like being in woods and cliffs. Do you know, like we're exploring, but quite quickly. So we must be quite fleet of foot. But like, you're like, oh look, there's a waterfall, and I'm like, oh, hang on a minute, look, there's a cave behind there. And you're like, oh, and do you know what? I know, well, because this was you really exploring mine. I'm like, do you know what? Come with me. Because do you know what there is over here? There's a really nice glade. So it's like, it's been like scurrying around a place that I love with somebody who's fleet of foot and who can think and follow quickly.
Exploring a place that you love with someone who's fleet of foot and can think quickly. Anything else about fleet of foot?
Yes, so your ideas are adjacent, but they're around places, so they feel attractive as well to follow. But it's like you're not going, yeah, but what about going clubbing? I'm like, yeah, but we're in a forest with, it's close enough, so it's fleet, but it's also you're very comfortable and you're enjoying the environment. So you can go wherever I've gone, I'm sure you can go to.
That sureness is like what?
It's like I'm not constantly looking behind to see if you can follow me. And if you start speaking, I'm excited to see where you're going to go. So the sureness is, if I want to run somewhere, I'm sure you're going to come with me. And if you run somewhere, I'm sure it's going to be good. So that's what I mean, is that we can go in all sorts of different directions, exploring it together.
And then I think this is like my 4th question, so but I'm new to this, so I'll permit myself it or something. I'll edit it out. And then after you know that you don't have to look behind, then what happens?
Yeah, well, it's just a delight. So what happens metaphorically is, like, even if something's very slippy, we can scramble over it. Or but what happens in real life is that then it reminds me of other things. So it's like my mind's quite, I can remind it. It's fun. It's fun and it's not stayed. It's good fun. I've had good fun with you exploring these ideas.
Good fun with Daniel. That's the alternative to the podcast that I'm thinking about. How was that clean language? Yeah,
no, that was great. You probably noticed that you were starting to go after the last thing I said and the last thing I said before then. If you do that, that's a common thing when you're learning. You can end up down rabbit holes. So one clean language skill is ask a question, ask another question, then summarize what you've got, because then you can go anywhere. Whereas if you follow the last thing and the last thing and the last thing, you'll find it hard to get back to the first thing they said.
Yeah, and I also found that it sounded like I was going after my interest there, which was like the glade and the thing and that metaphor. And tell me more about that one.
So whereas if you kind of summarise back, you can notice what are all the words I missed and go for one of those.
Nice. Dr. Caitlin Walker, thanks for coming on Agile on the Mind today.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you for exploring and playing with these ideas with me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Agile on the Mind with me, Daniel Susser, and Dr. Caitlin Walker. If you enjoyed this episode, there's a good chance you'll enjoy the rest of Agile on the Mind. There are more podcast episodes available on your favourite podcasting medium and many, many blog posts about agile, cognitive science and building intelligent teams. Go to agileonthemind.substack.com and click subscribe. We'll see you next time.